All right. Hello, I am Lori Duff, and welcome to Beer, Besties, or Banish. I'm here today with Jude Berman, and she is the author of The Die and the Lie. And she is here to talk about which characters in her book would she'd like to have a beer with, she'd be besties with, or she'd like to kick to the curb. So let's start with beer. Who would you like to have a beer with, Jude?
Well, I have an interesting take on that one, which is the characters in those two books, which one's a sequel of the other. They're the same characters, and one of the main characters' names is Beers. So, by definition, I would want to have a beer with Beers. I think it's an unusual name, and I chose it partly because it makes him friendlier, I think, and approachable and somebody you'd want to have a beer with.
Is Beers his real name?
Beers is his real name, yeah.
So when he was a baby, they called him Beers?
Well, he's not a baby in the books. I didn't have to deal with that. I don't give my character, well, that's not true. Some of the, one or two of the characters I can think of have last names, but they don't all have last names. They don't kind of need last names. So, um, possibly his last name is Beers, and he only got called that as an adult. But those are kind of questions that aren't answered in the book. But I guess if I had to guess, I would say yes. He probably got that as a name later on in life, and it might not be. It might or might not be his actual name. He could be somebody else, and maybe it was a joke over Beers. Now I have to go back and read the first book and make sure I didn't actually say something about why he got that name. But I don't think I did.
Okay. All right. And who of your characters would be your bestie?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Beers could be many people's besties just because of those qualities of him. But for me, it would have to be Dara. And that's because of all of the characters, she is the one that I modeled in sort of psychologically speaking, more over, myself as a version in some sort of a transposed version of myself. Her circumstances are different, but there's an internal similarity. And so, I mean, who wouldn't want to be a bestie with oneself?
That's interesting that you say that because for what it's worth, the characters based on myself in my books, I think are too much. Like I think they're too much like me, and I don't know that I would get along with them.
That's true. I would probably criticize. I mean, one of the ways she's like me is her sort of overly sensitive nature in some respects. And I think that would bug me in somebody else because I don't necessarily like that about myself. So maybe bestie isn't quite the right term there, but if you were to say, well, who would you want to meet? You can only meet one of them in real life. I would kind of have to choose her.
Okay. And who would you banish?
Who would I banish? Well, I've got a whole crew of evil types in my book, so I would actually banish them all. They, in those two books, I mean, they're the same sort of crew, the bad guys, and in this, I'm kind of closer to the second book right now because that's the one I've, worked on most recently. And there's this guy Keith who, I mean, he's just evil incarnate. So yeah, we want to banish him entirely. And all his other, the rest of his cohort can go with him.
But he's the one who gets under your skin the most.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting thing of having, characters who are evil with really no redeeming qualities in a book. And I went that route. I mean, it works for those books to have that kind of, because there are those, I think, powers of evil or manifestations of evil in our world. And so I put that in this book as opposed to, some other types of stories where you kind of want all your characters, to be more nuanced and not any like total villains, but I went with that, and so where was I going with that? I think that, I mean that makes them banishable, but it's not. Yeah, it's a characteristic of that kind of book that has those characters.
I think it's interesting that you chose Keith, who I agree is absolutely banishable. Um, instead of the dictator.
Yeah, because the dictator's not an actual character in the book.
He's
If
kind of
in
abstract.
either book, he is never a character. That was an intentional. That's an interesting point you brought that up. Yeah, and that um when I was, conceptualizing the whole thing, I think I maybe initially thought that the dictator would somehow be a character, but then it became really clear that, I mean, so maybe you could say that the dictator is the evil incarnate, and then these other people are who carry it out. Um, and actually, Keith has a few redeeming qualities in the first book. So, but he has none in the second book. And his his redeeming qualities in the first book are kind of minor. They're more the fact that Dara kind of likes him till she realizes how bad he is. So that's not really redeeming. Um, but yeah, I felt like, oh, I wanted to find a realistic way to put evil into how it manifests through people, and doing it through the dictator felt would have, I don't know, it just felt more somehow realistic to do it through these individuals who are acting on his behalf.
And let's put this in a little context for anyone who's listening so they understand who these characters are in the broad context of your books. Go ahead and give us the elevator pitch for your series.
The elevator pitch. Okay, so the elevator pitch is these books are both taking place in the near future, in California, where California is an independent nation. And my characters, the well, not other than the, the evil people, the good people are working in a gaming company, and they're discovering that the forces of the dictator are threatening their country, and the dictator has control of the states but not of California, and so they are, you know entrusted with being able to solve that problem and get rid of that threat.
Well, I have to say, I have read both books. They are amazing, and I will post the a link so that everyone can check them out. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I enjoyed talking to you and hearing your take on your own characters.
Thank you.